Father of the Niben, by Florin Jalil. Translation of the fragmented journal of Topal the Pilot. Introduction. Writing the biography of anyone is a challenge. Usually, the problem lies in assessing one's sources, comparing the prejudices of one chronicle versus another. Warren Jarve, I have been told, in writing his well-regarded series on the Wolf Queen of Solitude, used over 100 contemporary narratives. I cannot complain about my task having a similar issue. There is but one record of the man called Topal the Pilot, the earliest known Aldmeri explorer of Tamriel. Only 4 short verse fragments of the epic Father of the Niben have survived to present day, but they offer an interesting if controversial look at the Middle Malefic era, when Topal the Pilot may have sailed the seas around Tamriel. Though Father of the Niben is the only written record of Topal the Pilot's voyages, it is not the only proof of his existence. Among the treasures of the Great Crystal Tower of Somerset Isle are his crude but fascinating maps, his legacy to all Tamriel. The translation of the Aldmeri Undhendra Nibenu, Father of the Niben, is my own, and I accept that other scholars may disagree with some of my choice of words. I cannot promise my translation lives up to the beauty of the original. I have only strived for simple coherence. Fragment 1. Second ship, the Pasquiniel, manned by pilot Ilio, was to follow the southern pointing, Waystone, and the third, the Niben, manned by pilot Topal, was to follow the northeast pointing Waystone. The orders from the Crystal Tower, they were to sail forth for 80 moons and then return to Tel. Only Niben returned to First Hold, laden high with gold and spice and fur and strange creatures, dead and live. Though, alas, old Elnofe Topal never found, he told the tales of the lands he had visited to the wonderment of all. For 46 days and nights, he sailed over crashing waves of dire intent, past whirlpools, through mist that burned like fire, until he reached the mouth of a great bay and he landed on a sun-kissed meadow of gentle dells. As he and his men rested, there came a fearsome howl, and hideous orcs streamed forth from the murky glen, cannibal teeth clotted with gore. For centuries, strange crystalline balls were unearthed at the sites of ancient Aldmeri shipwrecks and docks, peculiar artifacts of the Malefic and Dawn eras that puzzled archaeologists until it was demonstrated that each had a tendency to rotate on its axis in a specific direction. There were 3 varieties, one that pointed southward, one that pointed northeast, and one that pointed northwest. It is not understood how they work, but they seemed attuned to particular lines of power. These are the waystones of the fragment, which each of the pilots used to point their craft in the direction they were assigned to go. A ship with a name not mentioned in the fragment took his vessel northwest towards Thras and Yokuda. The Pasquiniel took the southern waystone and must have sailed down towards Pyandania. Topal and his northeast waystone found the mainland of Tamriel. It is clear from this fragment what the 3 ships were assigned to do: find a passage back to Old Elnofe, so that the aldmer now living in Somerset could learn what became of their old homeland. As this book is intended to be a study of Topal the Pilot, there is scarcely room to dedicate to different theories of the Aldmeri exodus from Old Elnofe. If I were using this poem as my only source, I would have to agree with the scholars who believe in the tradition that several ships left Old Elnofe and were caught in a storm. Those who survived found their way to Somerset Isle, but without their waystones, they did not know what direction their homeland was. After all, what other explanation is there for 3 ships heading in 3 opposite directions to find a place? Naturally, only one of the ships returned, and we do not know if either or both of the other 2 found Old Elnofe, or perished at sea or at the hands of the ancient Pyandanians, Slode or Yokodans. We must assume, unless we think the Aldmer particularly idiotic, that at least one of them must have been pointing in the right direction. It may well have even been Topal, and he simply did not go northeast far enough. So, Topal, setting sail from First Hold, heads northeast, which, coincidentally, is the longest one can travel along the Abyssinian Sea without striking land of any kind. Had he traveled straight east, he would have struck the mainland somewhere in what is now the Colovian west of Cyrodiil in a few weeks. Had he traveled southeast, he might have reached the hump of Valenwood in a few days. But our pilot, judging by his own and our modern maps, sailed in a straight line northeast through the Abyssinian Sea and into the Iliac Bay before touching ground somewhere near present-day Anticlair in 2 months' time. The rolling verdant hills of southern High Rock are unmistakable in this verse, recognizable to anyone who has been there. The question, of course, is what to be made of this apparent reference to orcs occupying the region. Tradition has it that the orcs were not born until after the aldmer had settled the mainland, that they sprang up as a distinct race following the famous battle between Trinamac and Boethia at the time of Resdane. It is possible that the tradition is wrong. Perhaps the orcs were an aboriginal tribe predating the Aldmeri colonization. Perhaps these were accursed folk, Orzamer, in the Aldmeris, the same word for orc, of a different kind, whose name was to be given the orcs in a different era. It is regrettable that the fragment ends here, for more clues to the truth are undoubtedly lost. What's missing between the first fragment and the second is appreciable. It must be more than 80 months that have passed, because Topal is on the opposite side of mainland Tamriel now, attempting to sail southwest to return to First Hold, after his failure at finding Old Elnofe. Fragment 2. No passage westward could be found in the steely cliffs that jutted up like Giant's Jaw, so the Niben sailed south. As it passed a sandy, forested island that promised sanctuary and peace, the crew cheered in joy. Then exultation turned to terror as a great shadow rose. From the trees on levered wings like an unfurling cape, the great bat lizard was large as the ship, but good pilot Topal merely raised his bow and struck it in its head. As it fell, he asked his boatswain, "Do you think it's dead?" And before it struck the white-bearded waves, he shot once more its heart to be certain. And so for another 40 days and 6, the Niben sailed south. We can see that in addition to Topal's prowess as a navigator, cartographer, survivalist, and raconteur, he is a master of archery. It may be poetic license, of course, but we do have archaeological proof that the mirific aldmer were sophisticated archers. Their bows of layers of wood and horn drawn by silver silk thread are beautiful, and still, I have heard experts say, millennia later, very deadly. It is tempting to imagine it a dragon, but the creature that Topal faces at the beginning of this fragment sounds like an ancestor of the cliff racer of present-day Morrowind. The treacherous cliff coastline sounds like the region around Necrom, and the island of Gorn may be where the nest of the bat lizard is. No creatures like that exist in eastern Morrowind, to my knowledge, at the present day. Fragment 3. The fetid evil swamplands and their human lizards retreated to the east, and Topal and his men's hearts were greatly gladdened by the sight of diamond blue, pure, sweet ocean. For 3 days, they sailed in great cheer northwest, where First Hold beckoned them, but hope died in horror as land, like a blocking shield, rose before them. Topal the pilot was sore wroth, and consulted the maps he had faithfully drawn, to see whether best to go south, where the continent must end, or take the river that snaked through a passage north. "North!" cried he to his sad men. "North we go now. Fear not, north!" Tracing Topal's movements, we see that he has skirted the edge of Morrowind and delved into southern Blackmarsh, seemingly determined to follow his waystone as best as he can. The swamp he is leaving is probably near present-day Gideon. Knowing what we now know about Topal's personality, we can understand his frustration in the bay between Blackmarsh and elsewhere. Here is a man who follows his orders explicitly, and knows that he should have been going southeast through riverways to reach First Hold. Looking at his maps, we can see that he attempted to find passages through as he mapped out the inner sea of Morrowind, and several of the swampy tributaries of Blackmarsh, no doubt being turned away by the disease and fierce Argonian tribes that dissuaded many other explorers after him. With a modern map of Tamriel in hand, we can see that he makes the wrong choice in electing to go northeast instead of pushing southward. He could not have known then that what he perceived to be the endless mainland was only a jutting peninsula. He only knew that he had travelled too far southward already, and so he made a smart but incorrect decision to go up the river. It is ironic that this great miscalculation would today bear his mark of history. The bay he thought was an endless ocean is now known as Topal Bay, and the river that took him astray shares the name of his boat, the Niben River. Fragment 4. The cat demons of 4 legs and 2 ran the river's length, always keeping the boat in their green-eyed sight, hissing and spitting and roaring with rage. But the sailors never had to brave the shores, for fruit trees welcomed them, dropping their arms down to the river's edge as if to embrace the mer, and the men took the fruit quickly before the cats could pounce. For 11 days they travelled north, until they came to a crystalline lake and 8 islands of surpassing beauty and peace. Brilliant, flightful creatures of glorious colours greeted them in Aldmeri language, making the mer wonder until they understood they were only calling back the word they were speaking without understanding it. And then the sailors laughed. Topal the pilot was enchanted with the islands and the feathered men who lived there. There the Niben stayed for a moon, and the birdmen learned how to speak their own words, and with talent feet, to write. In joy for their new knowledge, they made Topal their lord, giving him their islands for the gift. Topal said he would return someday, but first he must find the passage east to Firsthold, so far away. This last fragment is bittersweet for a number of reasons. We know that this strange, friendly, feathered people the pilot encounters will be lost. In fact, this poem is the only one where mention is made of the bird creatures of Cyrodiil. The literacy that Topal gives them is evidently not enough to save them from their eventual fate, likely at the hands of the cat demons, who we may assume are ancient Khajiit. We know that Topal and his crew never find a route from the 8 islands, which are the modern-day Imperial City, through to the Iliac Bay. His maps tell the tale where this lost poem cannot. We see his hand as he traces his route up the Niben to Lake Rumer, and, after attempting a few tributaries, which do not lead him where he wants to go, we can imagine Topal's frustration, and that of his long-suffering crew, as they return back down the Niben to Topal Bay. There, they evidently discovered their earlier mistake, for we see that they passed the peninsula of Elsewhere. Eventually, they travelled along its coastline, past the shores of Valenwood, and eventually home. Usually, epic tales end with a happy ending, but this one begins with one, and the means to which it was accomplished is lost. Besides the extraordinary bird creatures of present-day Cyrodiil, we have caught glimpses of ancient orcs, perhaps, ancient cliff racers, ancient Argonians, and in this fragment, ancient Khajiit. Quite a history in a few lines of simple verse, all because a man failed to find his home, and took all the wrong turns to retrace his steps back.